The most controversial opinion in NFL history isn't about Tom Brady. It isn't about the greatest of all time debate. It's this: the 1985 Chicago Bears weren't just the best defense ever built. They were so terrifyingly dominant that the NFL secretly changed its rules because of them. Think about that. The league didn't just admire them, they feared them enough to rewrite the rule book. But here's what nobody talks about: this team should have won three, maybe four Super Bowls. They had the youngest defense in football, Hall of Famers at every position, a defensive scheme so devastating that offensive coordinators still lose sleep studying it 40 years later. And they got exactly one championship. One. So today, we're asking the question every NFL analyst is too afraid to answer honestly. Was the 1985 Chicago Bears defense the greatest team ever assembled? Or did internal sabotage, ego, and one catastrophic decision destroy what should have been the most dominant dynasty in football history? Because the truth is darker, more controversial, and far more interesting than anything you've been told. Let's get into it. Here's something the NFL doesn't want you to know. The greatest defense in football history wasn't built on teamwork. It wasn't built on brotherhood or chemistry or any of that feel-good locker room talk you hear every Sunday. It was built on pure, venomous, borderline, violent hatred between two men who despised each other so deeply that coaches had to physically separate them during team meetings. And without that hatred, the 1985 Bears never happened. Let's go back to 1981. Chicago Bears, a franchise with the most storied defensive history in NFL history. The Monsters of the Midway had become a complete embarrassment. 5 losing seasons in 6 years. Soldier Field, once the most feared stadium in football, had turned into a place opposing offenses came to practice their statistics. The fans weren't just frustrated, so they were humiliated. This was George Halas's franchise, the man who literally helped invent professional football, and it was rotting from the inside. George Halas was 86 years old, running out of time, and he knew it. So in 1982, he made the most important phone call in Chicago Bears history. He called Mike Ditka. Now understand what Ditka represented. He wasn't just a coach. He was a former Bears tight end, a man who played with the kind of violent intensity that Halas himself demanded. Iron Mike didn't believe in rebuilding projects or 5-year plans. He believed in one thing: dominance, immediately, non-negotiably. But here's where the story gets complicated and controversial. When Ditka arrived, there was already someone on staff building something extraordinary. Shaw's buddy Ryan, the defensive coordinator under the previous regime, had survived the coaching change. And nobody could understand why, because Buddy Ryan was the most abrasive, confrontational, disrespectful assistant coach in the history of the NFL. Ryan didn't treat Ditka like his boss. He treated him like an obstacle. In team meetings, Ryan would openly mock Ditka's offensive decisions in front of players, in front of the entire coaching staff. There are documented accounts of Ryan telling defensive players to their faces that Ditka's offense was irrelevant, that games were going to be won by his defense alone, that the other side of the ball was just killing time until his guys could get back on the field. Ditka wanted Ryan fired from day one. He went to ownership. He made his case. True, but here's the thing that changes everything. George Halas refused, because Halas, even at 86, could see what Ryan was building. He could see that this defensive coordinator, as insufferable as he was, had something that couldn't be coached, couldn't be manufactured, and couldn't be replaced. He had a vision for defensive football that nobody, not one person in the entire NFL, had ever seen before. And that vision had a name: the 46 defense. What Ryan was about to unleash on the NFL wasn't just a scheme, it was psychological warfare. Before we talk about what the 46 defense did to opposing offenses, you need to understand what it felt like to face it. Imagine you're a quarterback. You've spent your entire life studying football. You know every protection scheme, every blitz package, every coverage shell. You've been trained since high school to read defenses before the snap, to identify threats, to make pre-snap adjustments that neutralize pressure. Now imagine none of that works. Imagine standing behind center, looking at a defense that has completely scrambled everything you've ever learned. Six defenders on the line of scrimmage, safeties where linebackers should be, linebackers where defensive ends should be, corners creeping into the box, and every single one of them moving, shifting, disguising their assignment until the exact moment the ball is snapped. So you have approximately 1.8 seconds to throw before something very large and very angry destroys you. That was the 46th defense. And it wasn't chaos. That's the most important thing to understand. It looked like chaos. That was the entire point. But every single player had a precise assignment designed to create specific, calculated destruction. Buddy Ryan named it after safety Doug Plank, who wore number 46, because Plank was the original enforcer, a man who hit people so hard that the NFL would eventually change rules specifically because of how he operated. But the scheme itself was Ryan's pure genius. Here's what made it truly revolutionary and why it still influences every defense you watch today. Traditional NFL defenses operated on a principle of balance. You spread your defenders to cover the entire field. Sheriff Ryan did the exact opposite. He overloaded one side of the offensive line with so many bodies that blocking assignments became mathematically impossible. You can't block 6 people with 5 linemen. The numbers don't work. Someone is always coming free. And someone coming free in Buddy Ryan's defense meant Richard Dent was about to end the quarterback's evening. Richard Dent. Let's talk about Richard Dent for a moment, because his story is one of the most disrespectful things the NFL has ever done to a generational talent. An 8th round pick in 1983, the 203rd player selected. Teams passed on him 202 times. 202 times, NFL scouts looked at this man and said, not good enough. In 1985, Richard Dent had 17 sacks. He was named Super Bowl MVP. He is now in the Hall of Fame, though, and every single team that passed on him 202 times had to watch him terrorize their quarterbacks for a decade. But Dent was just the most visible piece of the machine. Dan Hampton was destroying offensive lines from the interior, so versatile he could line up at end or tackle and dominate from both spots. Steve McMichael, who would wait 38 years for his Hall of Fame induction, receiving it in 2024 while battling ALS, was collapsing pockets from the inside. And then there was Mike Singletary, middle linebacker, the heartbeat of the entire defense. Singletary is the most important player in the 46 defense that nobody properly talks about, because Ryan's scheme was extraordinarily complex. The shifts, the disguises, the late movements, all of it required a defensive quarterback who could process information at superhuman speed and communicate adjustments to 10 other players in under 3 seconds. Singletary did this with his eyes literally bulging out of his head, screaming assignments with a ferocity that teammates described as genuinely terrifying. Former Bears players said Singletary's pregame speeches were more intense than the actual games. His preparation was obsessive, his film study was legendary, and his ability to read offensive formations before the snap gave the 46th defense an intelligence layer that made it virtually unstoppable. By 1984, the pieces were almost complete, but almost cost them everything that year. A 10-6 season ended with a 23-0 humiliation at the hands of the San Francisco 49ers in the NFC Championship game. The Bears weren't just beaten, they were embarrassed on national television. Their defense was exposed, their offense was exposed, and every player went home that winter carrying something that would transform them. Pure consuming rage. Because what happened when that rage was pointed at the entire NFL in 1985 wasn't a football season. It was a demolition, and the first victim had absolutely no idea what was coming. The 1985 NFL season began on September 8th, and by week 4, every offensive coordinator in the league was having the same private conversation. We have no answer for this. Game 1, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Bears 38, Buccaneers 28. The score looks competitive. It was not. Chicago's defense scored 2 touchdowns themselves and created so many turnovers that the offense barely needed to function. The Bears' defense wasn't just stopping offenses anymore. They were scoring on them. Game 2, New England Patriots. Bears 20, Patriots 7. A preview of something that would happen in January that the Patriots couldn't have possibly imagined. And then week 6 arrived. Dallas Cowboys, their home field, their stadium, America's team in front of America on national television. Bears 44, Cowboys 0-0. Not a field goal. Child, not a lucky drive late in the fourth quarter with the backups in. 0 points. The Dallas Cowboys, one of the most iconic offensive franchises in NFL history, gained 239 total yards and crossed into the end zone exactly 0 times. The 46 defense didn't just beat America's team that day, it publicly humiliated them. And here's what made it more devastating. The Cowboys knew it was coming. They had weeks to prepare. They had film study, coordinator meetings, specialized game plans designed specifically to combat Chicago's pressure packages. They had veteran offensive linemen who'd seen everything. None of it mattered. By week 8, the Bears were 8-0. The 1972 Miami Dolphins, the only team in NFL history to finish a season undefeated, were watching very carefully. Don Shula and his players had a tradition of waiting for the last undefeated team to lose each season, then celebrating with champagne. They were holding the glasses. The Bears kept winning, 9-0. Then the personalities started taking over the national conversation in ways that NFL had never seen before. Jim McMahon, the quarterback, was wearing headbands with corporate logos to deliberately mock Commissioner Pete Rozelle, who had banned players from wearing branded gear. When Rozelle fined him, McMahon wore a headband that said Rozelle to his face at the Super Bowl. This was the quarterback of the most dominant team in football, openly mocking the commissioner of the league on the biggest stage in sports. And then there was William Perry, the refrigerator, 335 pounds, a defensive tackle who Ditka started deploying as a fullback in goal line situations, partially as a tactical weapon, partially because it was the most entertaining thing anyone had ever seen in professional football. When Perry scored his first touchdown, America genuinely lost its collective mind. He appeared on late-night television. He got endorsement deals. He was invited to WrestleMania, a defensive tackle. At WrestleMania, the Bears had become bigger than football. They were a cultural phenomenon. Then came December 2nd, 1985. Miami, Monday Night Football, the entire country watching. Jim McMahon was injured. Backup Steve Fuller was starting. As in Dan Marino, operating with a quick release so fast it had already redefined the quarterback position, had identified the one vulnerability in the 46 defense that nobody had successfully exploited all season. Get the ball out before the pressure arrives. 3-step drops, quick slants, rapid fire releases to single coverage. Marino picked them apart. The Dolphins won 38-24. And in the Bears locker room afterward, several players were crying. Now here's the controversial part that most videos get completely wrong. The Miami loss did not expose the 46 defense. Marino was operating at a level that was frankly unprecedented. His release time that season was measured at under 1.3 seconds on quick routes. The 46 defense needed 1.8 seconds to generate pressure. Against a normal quarterback, that gap was insurmountable. Though against Marino in 1985, it was just barely enough. But the Bears did something that night that separated them from every other great team in NFL history. Richard Dent walked out of that locker room and told reporters, and I'm quoting directly, "The Dolphins just woke up a sleeping giant. They didn't lose again. 15-1, two playoff shutouts waiting, and a Super Bowl performance so one-sided it bordered on criminal." Super Bowl 20 January 26th, 1986, New Orleans Superdome. What happened over the next 3 hours wasn't football. It was a public execution, and everyone watching knew it within the first 12 minutes. But before we get to the Super Bowl, we need to talk about the two playoff games that preceded it, because they represent something that has never happened in NFL history before or since, and almost certainly never will again. NFC Divisional Round, New York Giants at Soldier Field, temperature 14 degrees, wind chill below zero. The conditions were already brutal when Giants punter Sean Landeta lined up in his own end zone for what should have been a routine punt. The wind caught the ball. Landeta swung his leg and connected with nothing but Chicago air. The ball hit the frozen turf, and Bears defensive back Sean Gale scooped it up and scored. The Bears won 21-0. The Giants, a team that would go on to win the Super Bowl the following year, never scored a single point. NFC Championship, Los Angeles Rams, Eric Dickerson, the NFL's best running back, a man who had rushed for 1,234 yards that regular season, carried the ball against Chicago's defense and finished with 46 yards. The Bears' defense was, according to multiple witnesses, physically picking up Rams players and throwing them out of the way. Not blocking, not tackling, throwing. Quarterback Dieter Brock completed 10 of 31 passes for 66 yards. The Rams gained 130 total yards in an NFL championship game. Bears 24, Rams 0, two playoff games, two shutouts, 0 points allowed. It had never been done before. Yes, it has not been done since. Now the Super Bowl, New England came in having beaten the Jets and Raiders in the playoffs. They had a functional offense, a capable quarterback in Tony Eason, and a head coach in Raymond Berry, who had spent 2 weeks preparing specifically for the 46 defense. The Bears defense reviewed New England's preparation and reportedly laughed. The Patriots scored first, a field goal after a Walter Payton fumble. They led 3-0 for exactly 1 minute and 19 seconds. And then the Bears defense did something that sounds statistically impossible. In the first half, the New England Patriots gained negative 19 yards of total offense. Negative 19 yards. Not bad yards, not low yards, negative yards, meaning after every play in the first half was added together, the Patriots had less field position than when the half started. Tony Eason was sacked 3 times and completed 0 passes before being benched. Steve Grogan replaced him and was immediately treated with the same violence. Richard Dent hit Grogan so hard at one point that Grogan's helmet flew completely off his head. He laid on the field for several seconds, not entirely certain what planet he was on. Final score, Bears 46, Patriots 10, 7 rushing yards total for the entire game. Now here is the most controversial moment of Super Bowl 20 and the wound that never fully healed in Chicago. Walter Payton, the greatest running back alive, the NFL's all-time leading rusher at that point in history, a man who had given everything to the Chicago Bears through the worst seasons, the embarrassing losses, the years when this franchise was a joke. He had never scored a Super Bowl touchdown, and Mike Ditka gave the touchdown to William Perry instead. A novelty play, a publicity stunt. Perry waddled into the end zone from 1 yard out, while Walter Payton, who had specifically asked Ditka for the opportunity, stood on the sideline. Payton was gracious publicly. Privately, according to teammates, he was devastated. It remains one of the most debated coaching decisions in Super Bowl history. Ditka himself later admitted it was a mistake, one of his greatest regrets. The greatest Bear never got his Super Bowl touchdown. Richard Dent was named MVP. The Bears defense had allowed 10 total points in 3 playoff games. The championship was won. The celebration was enormous. And in the locker room, the clock on the greatest dynasty that never was had already started ticking, because what happened in the 72 hours after that Super Bowl victory destroyed everything. 72 hours after winning the most dominant Super Bowl in NFL history, the 1985 Chicago Bears were already dying, and the man who killed them wasn't on the opposing sideline. Buddy Ryan accepted the Philadelphia Eagles head coaching job 2 days after the Super Bowl. He didn't consult the organization. He didn't have a transition plan. He took the defensive playbook, his coaching relationships, and his complete understanding of every Bears defensive player, and he walked out the door. Mike Ditka's reaction when asked by reporters was one of the most revealing quotes in NFL history. He said, and I quote directly, "I was elated." That one word, elated, tells you everything about why the dynasty collapsed. The two most important football minds on that team hated each other so completely that when one left, the other was relieved, thou not concerned, not worried about defensive continuity or scheme transition or replacing an irreplaceable defensive architect. Elated. Here's the brutal football reality that no one discusses honestly enough. The 46 defense was not a scheme that could be handed off. It was a living system built on Ryan's real-time adjustments, his psychological manipulation of players, his ability to disguise looks in ways that required understanding the system at its deepest level. The coordinators who replaced Ryan understood the formations. They did not understand the philosophy. The Bears defense in 1986 gave up 187 more points than in 1985 in 1 year, with essentially the same personnel. That is the Buddy Ryan effect. But Ryan's departure wasn't the only thing that destroyed the dynasty. What happened to Jim McMahon in November 1986 should have resulted in criminal charges, and the NFL's handling of it remains one of the most disgraceful moments in the league's history. Green Bay Packers, defensive lineman Charles Martin. In the second quarter of a regular season game, after McMahon had already thrown the ball, Martin picked up the quarterback, who was standing completely still. Play over, no threat whatsoever, and bodies slammed him into the turf, intentionally, deliberately. Martin had a towel in his pregame warm-ups with the numbers of Bears players he intended to injure written on it. McMahon's name was on it. McMahon suffered a separated shoulder that effectively ended him as a functional starting quarterback. He never played a full season again. Martin was suspended for 2 games for what was, by any reasonable interpretation, a premeditated assault on a standing quarterback. The NFL fined the Packers. They did not pursue the matter further. McMahon, the punk rock quarterback who had given the Bears their offensive identity, was never the same player again. By 1988, the magic was gone. The Bears made the playoffs. Ditka was still a good coach, but they were a different team. The offensive inconsistency that Ryan had always mocked became their defining characteristic. The defense, without Ryan's genius, became merely very good rather than historically dominant. 1 Super Bowl, that's all they got. Now let's address the legacy question directly, because this is where the debate gets genuinely controversial. Were the 1985 Bears the greatest defensive team ever assembled? The 2000 Baltimore Ravens had Ray Lewis, Peter Boulware, and in a unit that allowed 10.3 points per game. Impressive. But they needed Trent Dilfer, one of the most limited quarterbacks in Super Bowl history, to not actively lose games for them. The Bears' defense scored touchdowns. They were an offensive weapon. The 2002 Tampa Bay Buccaneers, under Monty Kiffin's Tampa 2 scheme, were genuinely elite, but they didn't shut out 2 playoff opponents back-to-back. Nobody has done that except the 1985 Bears. The 2013 Seattle Seahawks under Pete Carroll were arguably the most complete modern defense. Legion of Boom, Cover 3 variants, the Richard Sherman era, but they allowed 23 points in the Super Bowl. The 85 Bears allowed 10 in 3 games combined. The numbers don't lie. 64 sacks in a season, 54 total takeaways, 12.4 points per game allowed in an era when offensive rules were already beginning to shift toward protecting passers. 3 playoff games, 10 total points allowed. 4 Hall of Famers from one defensive core, Singletary, Hampton, Dent, and McMichael, who finally received his induction in 2024 while battling ALS. He accepted the honor from a wheelchair. He received a standing ovation that lasted longer than almost any in the ceremony's history. It took 38 years, but even the Hall of Fame eventually had to acknowledge what the football world already knew. Every defensive coordinator in the NFL today has studied the 46 defense. The concept of overloading the line of scrimmage, disguising coverages, bringing pressure from unexpected angles. These are the foundations of modern defensive football. When you watch a safety creep into the box on Sunday, that is Buddy Ryan's philosophy evolved. When a linebacker shows blitz and drops into coverage, that is the 46 defense's DNA. The 1985 Chicago Bears didn't just win a Super Bowl, they changed the language of football permanently. They also gave us the Super Bowl Shuffle, a rap video recorded in November, 7 games before the season ended, essentially guaranteeing a championship before it happened. It was nominated for a Grammy. It has been viewed hundreds of millions of times across every platform. It remains the single most audaciously confident act in professional sports history. That's not arrogance. That's a team that knew exactly what it was. The greatest defense ever assembled. The greatest dynasty that never was. The team that forced an entire league to change its rules, alter its offensive philosophies, and redefine what defensive football could look like. 40 years later, every great defense gets compared to one standard. Not the Ravens, not the Seahawks, not the Steel Curtain, the 1985 Chicago Bears. And until someone shuts out 2 playoff teams consecutively and holds a Super Bowl opponent to 7 rushing yards, that standard will never change. The Bears didn't just win that year. They became the permanent measuring stick for greatness. And that is a legacy that no rule change, no dynasty, and no amount of time will ever take away.